Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming. We're going to be talking today about Social Security. I'm Marvin Kalb, senior fellow at the, I'm not a senior fellow, I'm the senior advisor, I like that even more, to the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, which is located just upstairs. And when we talk about Social Security, many of us will immediately think about the third rail idea that you can't really touch this because it's too hot and you'll get hurt if you try. Well, the study before us today, and the one that we're going to be considering, is called Is It Really a Third Rail? And How the American People Would Reform Social Security. And I think that many of us who've been involved even on the fringes of this problem have heard that by the year 2034, dreadful things may happen to Social Security if we don't take ameliorative steps before we get to those dreadful times. And what we're going to do this morning is focus on a new study that is done by a new organization, the Program for Public Consultation, part of which is the Voice of the People, and the person who directs it is Steven Kull, who was to my immediate right, and he'll talk to us about that. But one of the central issues that I get out of the reading of this study is that for those people who feel that there is no way around this third rail, there is, and that if you address it from the point of view of what the American people think about a possible solution, what you come up with is that by sizable majorities, both Democrats and Republicans, the American people do feel that a sensible compromise is the way to go, and that sensible compromise involves, on the one hand, obviously, raising taxes, and on the other, limiting benefits that are available, but balancing the two in an intelligent way can be done in the opinion of overwhelming majorities of the American people. So that if politicians have fear of taking a step, they do have, according to the study, the American people behind them. And what we'll do this morning is I'll ask Steven Kull, who is the director of the program and is a very well-known pollster and someone who is a kind of political psychologist, to read what it is that the American people are thinking about this problem, and then ask two colleagues from Brookings to analyze what it is that Steve Kull has laid before us. So let's start with Steve first, and then we'll go to the experts.
Thank you very much, Marvin. Thank you all for coming. Often when the federal government has problems, there's a tendency to assume that the real root of the problem is the American people. There's one story that goes that when Congress is polarized and having gridlock, this is a mirror of the division in the American people. And in some cases, the story is that the public is so psychologically immature that it can't face problems that require dealing with difficult trade-offs. Now, sometimes standard polls contribute to this impression. For example, in regard to Social Security, various polls have asked respondents, do you favor or oppose cutting benefits? And people go, oh, no, I don't really like that idea. Do you favor or oppose raising the payroll tax rate? No, I wouldn't like that. And thus the response is, well, the public just can't cope with this. They can't stand the idea of dealing with reality, and thus dealing with something like Social Security is a third rail. There's no way to do this in a way that can work politically without getting in trouble with the public. But there is actually a method for dealing with these kinds of challenging problems that go beyond standard polls. It's often called public consultation. There are other groups around the country that are doing this, and one method involves doing surveys that go beyond the off-the-cuff response and give people information so that they go into a problem-solving mode rather than just sort of what's your first response, what's your first feeling response. And at PPC, we've developed what we call policymaking simulations, where the goal is to actually put people in the shoes of the policymakers to simulate the experience they have. And that means giving them a briefing on the issue, presenting various policy options and options that are actually in play, and then evaluating arguments for and against these options, strongly stated, and that are actually the arguments that are being used, evaluating the options independently, and then ultimately dealing with the problem as a whole in an integrated way so that you are actually dealing with the trade-offs involved rather than do you want, here's the whole package. Now, these have to be developed in close consultation with experts on both sides of the aisle to make sure that you have the arguments that are really in play. Again, you want to simulate the experience that people are having in Congress. And ultimately, the goal is that the citizens then make recommendations to their representatives, just like they're an advisor to a policymaker. So the idea is that collectively, you have what we call a citizen cabinet. Now, Voice of the People, which is sponsoring this organization, which is actually a distinct organization from PBC, is promoting the idea of creating a full national citizen cabinet so that there are several hundred in every congressional district that would go through these kinds of processes and give recommendations to their members so that their member would actually know what's going on in their district. Now, what we have today is what we might call a model citizen cabinet. It's a nationally representative sample, 738 members, and it is drawn from an existing panel that was originally set up by two Stanford professors. It was originally called Knowledge Networks and then was later acquired by GFK. So in developing the policy simulation, the content was reviewed by lead majority and minority staffers on the House Ways and Means Subcommittee on Social Security, and by the lead majority and minority staffers dealing with Social Security on the Senate Finance Committee. We also discussed it with experts at the American Enterprise Institute and the National Academy for Social Insurance. All of the options that we presented are ones that have been evaluated by the Social Security actuary and have been scored in terms of their impact on the Social Security shortfall, which is key. So again, the fielding company was GFK's, now they call it the Knowledge Panel. This is a nationally representative sample drawn. It's a probability-based national panel. It's not like one of these opt-in things where anybody can sign up. They're chosen through a scientific process. And panel members who do not have internet access or who are recruited and do not have internet access are then provided it. And then the questionnaire is administered over the internet, which is key because people then can take all the time they want to read and reread and really struggle with the problem. It was conducted in July with the 738 Americans, and this gives it a margin of error of plus or minus 3.6%. If you add in the design effect, 4.4%. So we started with a briefing. I won't go into all the detail. It's a rather long process, but it's all available to you, and you can go through the process online yourself, by the way, and see how you come out with it. So the briefing included background and basics of the program, how much the benefits were, how the benefits are progressive, and so on. And then a briefing on the Social Security shortfall, the time frame, the magnitude, the causes, the changing worker-retiree ratio, the fact that Americans are living longer, that seniors are a larger share of the population, and all these are done with graphs and so on, so that to really help people understand what's going on here. And then a key slide that we presented is this one to show what the impact would be if no action is taken, so that the reduction in the monthly benefit, the average monthly benefit in 2013 is $1,260. If the Social Security Trust Fund is depleted in 2033, this monthly benefit would go down 23%. In current terms, that would be going from 1,260 down to 970, and this, assuming the same level of poverty as today, the poverty level for seniors would likely rise from 9% to 18%. So then we said, okay, now we're going to look at all the various options for reforming Social Security. Now, the key ones involve covering the shortfall, which include reducing benefits for higher earners, raising the full retirement age, increasing income subject to the payroll tax, raising the payroll tax rate. But we also looked at other options for reforming Social Security that are in play, increasing the minimum benefit and increasing benefits for the very old. We also addressed the COLA alternatives, the cost of living adjustments. There's a lot of discussion about chain CPI, but we also looked at another option that's being discussed, which is basing CPI on what the elderly tend to buy. So now, looking at the first question about possibly reducing benefits, here is an idea that has been very much foreground in the congressional debate. I'm going to go through this in a little more detail, not so much on the other ones, but one option for reducing benefits is to reduce the amount of benefits that people with higher earnings will receive when they retire in the future. Currently, the more people earn while working, up to $113,000, the more they receive in monthly benefits. One option for new retirees only is to gradually lower benefits for people who had higher earnings. Their benefits would still be higher than people who had lower earnings, but their benefits would be less than people in that income group are currently scheduled to receive. Now, then we give them some arguments. Here's an argument in support of this proposition. We have to cover the Social Security shortfall in one way or another. Wealthier retirees have other ways to fund their retirement, such as pensions and savings. But right now, they get benefits that are higher than other people. This gap should be reduced, that their benefits are more like others. It's only fair. And then there's another one that Social Security is meant to address poverty. It's not meant to be, it really makes no sense that people with higher incomes even get higher benefits than people with lesser incomes. Now you can see on this question of would it be more fair, 59% say they find this a convincing argument. Among Republicans, 41%. Democrats, 75%. On the question of the argument that Social Security is meant to address poverty and therefore shouldn't be so progressive. Similar response, 46% of Republicans found that convincing, as did 73% of Democrats. Now, on the other side, the argument goes, many of the proposals for reducing benefits based on income would end up hurting some people who are part of the middle class, particularly people who live in areas of the country where the cost of living is high. We should not change Social Security in a way that forces seniors to lower their quality of life. And that gets large majorities among all around Republicans as well as Democrats. American workers have been paying Social Security payroll taxes for all their working lives on the promise that they would be getting this money back in the form of benefits. Reducing expected benefits to people who make more money is a violation of this understanding and changes Social Security from a retirement program into a welfare program. Here again, 7 in 10 overall find this convincing, an even larger number among Republicans as well as a large number of Democrats. By the way, in these processes, it's very normal for people to find both the pro and the con convincing. And we think that's actually a good sign. It shows that they're thinking. They're not just acting reflexively. They go, well, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. So it doesn't necessarily tell you how they're going to behave in the end. But this shows us that the arguments that they're being presented are making them think, that they're being persuaded. So then we asked them, okay, here's some proposals, and please rate them how acceptable or unacceptable they are on this scale from 0 to 10, from 0 to, which is completely unacceptable, all the way up to 10, which is completely acceptable, and in the middle, 5, which is just tolerable. And that 5 point is key because it says, okay, I can maybe live with this, right? So then we talk, okay, what about reducing benefits for the top 25%? That is those who have average earnings over their lifetimes about $65,500 a year and higher. Well, overall, 2/3 find that at least just tolerable. 38% go further than that. And interestingly, the Republicans find that more, less acceptable than Democrats. That might be a bit counterintuitive given the politics of how this idea is being presented. Now, if we go, by the way, I'm not giving you all the information they get. They get more information about more details about the impacts. Reducing the benefits for the top 40%, which would be those whose average earnings over their lifetime are about $47,000 a year and higher. Well, you can see this drops down rather abruptly, down below 50%, only 47% saying they find this tolerable or better. But again, Democrats are more amenable to reducing these benefits than Republicans. Again, somewhat counterintuitive. Going all the way down to 50%, the top 50%, that cutoff point being $39,000 a year, then it really drops off steeply. So you get large majorities saying that's just not acceptable. So another option is to reduce benefits by raising the full retirement age, which would reduce the total amount of benefits people would receive over their lifetime. Now, currently, the full retirement age is 66 years, and according to current law, it is scheduled to gradually rise until it reaches 67 by the year 2027, and then will stop rising. And this has no effect, though, on those already receiving Social Security, and it doesn't affect those born in 1960 or later. So we show them this graph to show how over time is gradually rising, and the proposal is already going to rise to 67, and the proposal would be for it to continue to gradually rise to 68 by the year 2034. And then we also say there's a proposal to go further all the way to 69 by the year 2041, and then to the age 70 all the way to 20, which would it would be slowed down, and then one would go to age 70 by the year 2064. So how do they evaluate these? Well, first, in terms of the arguments, I'm just giving little abbreviations here. The argument that with people living longer and fewer births, current retirement age is not realistic. 60% find that convincing. That people at 66 are healthier now, doing less physically demanding work. 61% find that convincing. On the other side, it's unfair to raise the retirement age. Many blue-collar jobs are physically demanding. 2/3 find that convincing. And really, this is really a lifetime benefit cut that would especially hurt low-income people and minorities. 58% find that convincing. Okay, so what happens when they actually get down to it? Raising the retirement age to 68, 62% say that they would find it tolerable. Slightly more among Republicans, slightly less among the Democrats, but substantial numbers say they could possibly live with it. 69 drops down sharply, down to 51% that would find that tolerable. And among Democrats, a slight majority say it's not acceptable. And at going all the way to age 70, drops even further. Okay, what about the other side of the equation? Increasing revenues. One option is to raise the maximum amount of salary and wages subject to the Social Security payroll tax, also known as raising the cap. Currently, the amount of salary and wages that is subject to the Social Security payroll tax includes up to $113,700 per year. Now, I'm going to go through this in a little more detail because some of the responses to this are a little surprising. So, argument for it. People who are well off have benefited from all the great things about the American economic system. It is only fair that they should contribute more, and they can surely afford it. Remember, with this change, they will also get higher Social Security benefits, which is an important point. 2/3 find that convincing. Arguments against it. In general, increasing taxes is a serious mistake. It reduces the amount that Americans have to spend on their families' food, housing, clothes, education, everything. Over time, this would cause a hefty tax increase for some taxpayers, many of whom are not really wealthy. It would especially hurt the self-employed and certain small business owners. 6 in 10 find that convincing, especially Republicans. So, what do they think about the idea of gradually, over a period of 10 years, raising the limit on salary and wages subject to the payroll tax from $113,700 to $215,000? Well, that gets a rather robust 72% saying that they could find that tolerable, including 69% of Republicans. Now, what about eliminating the cap entirely on taxable income so that all salary and wages are subject to the tax? This would also increase the benefits paid to those people who pay more. Now, this would reduce the Social Security shortfall actually a very hefty amount, 72%. And The argument for it: the incomes of the wealthy have been growing by leaps and bounds, while the income of the middle class have been stagnating. It is time for the wealthy to step up and do their part by helping to make Social Security secure. Besides, all it means is that they pay the payroll tax all year, like everybody else, not just the first part of the year. And 76% find it convincing, including 7 in 10 Republicans. Now, what about the other side of the story? High earners just saw their income taxes, investment taxes, and Medicare taxes increased. Higher taxes will discourage them from working and encourage tax evasion. They will also have less money to make investments that create jobs and promote economic activity. This will hurt the economy. Now that gets a divided response. It's interesting. It's one of the weakest arguments that we found, probably the weakest. Only 47% found it convincing, though 57% of the Republicans did. Now, what about eliminating the cap? Which is a rather dramatic step. 72% overall said that they find it tolerable, with 51% saying it's acceptable. Actually, a little bit more than the idea of raising the cap. Eliminating the cap entirely gets slightly more support, which is a curious dynamic there, including 70% of Republicans, which is, again, somewhat surprising. All right, what about increasing the payroll tax rate? So another option is to gradually increase it so that in the first year the rate would go up from 6.2 to 6.25 for both the employer and the employee, second year to 6.3, and so on. So what about this argument? Social Security is a good investment. Paying a little bit more now will make workers more secure later. 65% find that convincing. On the other hand, this leaves employees with less, puts burden on employers who may have to cut back on hiring. Well, a larger number, 73%, find that convincing. So, what about the idea of going from 6.2 to 6.6 gradually over 8 years? Rather robust 68% find that acceptable, including 70% of Republicans and the same number of Democrats. It's something you may notice as we're going along here. The more people are involved in this, the differences between Republicans and Democrats seems to diminish the more they think about it. Going all the way to 6.9, still you get almost about two-thirds finding that acceptable. And then going all the way to 7.2 even gets a significant majority saying that they could find that tolerable. Now, we wanted to cover a few key things, arguments that are around on increasing benefits. I'm not going to cover it much, or the arguments or so on, but one idea was to raise the minimum benefit to $1,134 a month, and that gets rather strong numbers saying it's tolerable even among 55% of Republicans, and also the idea to supplement the benefits for those who are very old, so that at age 81 they gradually have an increase in their benefits, and that gets 6 in 10 finding that a tolerable idea. Now, about recalculating the COLA. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but basically you presented the chain CPI idea. Arguments for that were both for and against it were convincing, and two-thirds thought it was tolerable. But we also put forward the idea around that the COLA should be based on what the elderly tend to buy, and that got a fairly high number too, and these are obviously mutually exclusive, 60%. All right, now putting together the final package, and this is the key part. So here in the end, it's all put in front of them. So here are all the various proposals. We'd now like you to complete the most important part of the exercise. On the next screen, you will see all of the proposals you just evaluated, including the impact each proposal has on the Social Security shortfall. You can select your own preferred package. And as you'll see, some are mutually exclusive, so you can't choose some of them. And going along with them on the screen is a little box that tells them how much of the shortfall they've eliminated. So what about recalculating COLAs? Well, when these are put together and it's a mutually exclusive option, basically neither of them are made part of the package by a majority. 1/3 chose chain CPI, 1 out of 5 chose basing CPI on what the elderly tend to buy. Raising the minimum benefit. 47% included that in their package, slight majority of Democrats. Supplementing benefits for the very old, only about 1 in 3 included that in their package. Remember, they're dealing with a situation where they're dealing with this trade-off. They've got that little box staring at them. Now, looking now at the options for reducing the shortfall. Reducing benefits for those with higher earnings. 8 in 10 chose some option. 41% raised it for the top 25%, another 21% for the top 40%, so overall 79% raised it. Among Republicans, 76%, among Democrats, 82%. Interesting, again, Democrats cut the benefits more than the Republicans. Raising the retirement age. 78% raised the retirement age at least to age 68, and some went further. Republicans 82%, Democrats 80%. Raising or eliminating the cap on taxable earnings, and this is what really the striking one. Overwhelming majority at least raised it, and a slight majority even eliminated entirely, including Republicans. Again, what about increasing the payroll tax rate? 3/4 raised it at least to 6.6%, and some raised it higher, including Republicans and Democrats. So looking at the package here, overall you have 3/4 or more choosing options that, if you put them together, would cover 71% of the shortfall. And then if you go all the way to the step of eliminating the cap, which in 52% did that, you would more than cover it. You would have 113% of the shortfall covered. Republicans, not all that much different. Basically, there's even 53% of them included eliminating the cap. Democrats, again, the picture very similar. So the bottom line is 3/4 or more of Republicans and Democrats agreed on steps to eliminate most of the Social Security shortfall, and a modest majority agreed on steps that eliminated it entirely. Now I want to just quickly cover this because this is really quite interesting. You know, there's always this assumption that people are thinking about their best interests, right? And so you would expect that people who in higher incomes would be more resistant to changes that would, in a sense, cost them. So what about reducing benefits for those with higher earnings? Are people with higher earnings more resistant to that? The bottom line answer is no. There is not a significant difference. Increasing the full retirement age, we looked at the people who would be affected by that based on what age they are now. And the bottom line answer is there is not a difference, not a significant difference as to whether or not that retirement age would affect you personally. Raising the cap on taxable earnings. Here again, is there a difference depending upon where you are? Are those 100,000 or more resistant to raising the cap or eliminating it? The answer is clearly no. In fact, they even chose it slightly more often, not significantly, but there is no pattern there. And in terms of increasing the payroll tax rate, again, even though you have, this would have a more significant impact on people at lower incomes, they were actually no more resistant to including it in their package than people with upper incomes. So, just to reiterate, you can try this policymaking simulation yourself by going online, and I think you might find it a really interesting experience at vop.org. So let's move on to the discussion.
Steve, thank you very much. Listening to this, there's one large, not conclusion, but impression that leaps out at me anyway, and that is that if the American people are presented with even as complex an issue as Social Security, there appears to be a basic common sense driving certain attitudes, which I find to be terribly impressive. And we've invited Alice Rivlin. Seems silly to introduce her. Alice Rivlin, who's a senior fellow, economic study program at Brookings, visiting professor at Georgetown, and done everything else. And Bill Galston to her right, who was also a senior fellow at Brookings, was an advisor to President Clinton and knows a great deal about politics. And I would like to ask Alice first to address the program as Steve Kull has laid it out for us, perhaps initially from an economic point of view. Do the numbers make sense to you? And then Bill, from a political point of view, can we actually move from where we are now to something that approaches a solution? So Alice, please start us.
Okay, let me say first, I think this is a terrific report. I was really very excited by it, and for two reasons. In my personal space, it brings together two passions that I've had for a long time. One is for finding common ground on our polarized political situation and actually solving some problems. And the other is for putting Social Security back on a firm foundation. I've thought for a long time that although Marvin describes Social Security as a complex problem, it's actually less complex than most problems. And most people understand you pay in and you get benefits when you retire or are disabled or the breadwinner dies. And it's not hard to grasp that when you have a lot more seniors and in relation to the number of workers, that a well laid out program can get into trouble. So it seems to me really important to put Social Security, very popular program, very good program, back on a firm foundation. Now, for a long time, people who talked about this say, well, it's not going to run out of money until sometime in the 2030s. Like that was a long time from now. Had to do with future generations, and there was plenty of time to think about that. That is no longer true. We've known about the baby boomers forever, but they are retiring now. And furthermore, 2033 is advancing on us with great rapidity. Think about it. Somebody who will retire at 65 in 2033 is not a future generation. That person is 46 right now. They're a middle-aged worker. They need to know that the program will be there for them when they retire, and they need to be able to plan around a Social Security benefit. So from an economic point of view, I think the main thing is we need to have the security of knowing that Social Security is there, that it's not going to run out of money. Some people think it will just go away at some point. That's not realistic. But it's not going to have to cut benefits drastically. We have a good program that's well funded, and that's important for people in the labor force to know.
So Bill, why is it so difficult?
Well, I think we can begin to answer that question by looking back 30 years to the last time that Social Security was actually changed in a significant way, including a long-term decision to gradually raise the retirement age and to make other changes as well. And a condition prior, which was true 30 years ago and is true to a much higher power right now, is that the leaders of both political parties need to have made the decision that this is a problem that should be solved should be solved now, should be solved through a consultation across party lines. And it was because Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill had taken that step separately and then together, that the famous Greenspan Commission was actually politically authorized to do what it did. Now, I know it's a much more complicated story than that, but I can tell you that if you had the President of the United States, John Boehner, Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, and Harry Reid step forward on a podium together to say, we don't entirely agree about how to solve this problem, but we agree, number one, that it should be solved now to stabilize this for future generations, and number two, that it can be. That would be transformative. So that's the first answer to your question. Why is it so difficult? Because right now, the leaders of the political parties can't agree on where to have lunch or whether to have lunch. Okay, but there's something else as well. And having worked in this public consultation space now for 3 decades, I've learned something about it. Steve used the phrase, putting the people in the shoes of policymakers. I wrote that phrase down. And then I asked myself, well, okay, based on what I know, what does it mean to be in the shoes of policymakers right now? The people are speaking for themselves. The policymakers are speaking as representatives. And that means that they are subject to an additional range of pressures that individuals being consulted are not. They are subject to the disproportionate intensity of people at various points along the spectrum of opinion. They're subjected to organized interest groups. They are aware of the fact that relatively few average citizens will be up the knowledge curve as far as this exercise brings the chosen citizens up the knowledge curve. And they will also be aware that in these times of political polarization and partisan mistrust, that there is a gap between the substance of policymaking and the politics of policymaking. To be blunt, people are aware of the fact that policy issues are used as political weapons. And they're always aware of that fact in thinking about what they should do and whether they should step forward. So I think I have believed for decades that it is very important for policymakers to have an in-depth assessment of what the American people would accept if provided with accurate information. Having said that, policymakers are also aware of a gap between that answer and the answer to the question, what should I do in the here and now? They're aware of the gap between the citizen jury or public voice and the other sorts of influences that they must take into account.
But it's obviously very difficult for a politician to move on this issue. And what I'm getting at, and what I find so interesting about the way in which Steve has gone about the study, is that if you present the politician, who is supposed to be representative of the people, with the people's position, with their overall beliefs that you can solve this problem, you do it in a certain way, why then is it so difficult? Alice, let Alice go.
I think one reason is that politicians are not so much focused on solving problems, including this one, as in winning elections. And what they do know about Social Security is that it can be used to beat the other side over the head, no matter which side it is. And the compromises that can be reached in a group of politicians that want to solve the problem, as in the Simpson-Bowles Commission, for example, came up with a Social Security reform, or in groups of citizens that come together and want to solve the problem, they can do it. But they also want to win elections, and they know that if they go out there and say, the other side wants to cut your benefits, or the other side wants to raise your taxes, and people don't know very much about the context, that's a winning argument.
There is, let me just underscore the difference between this study and what I think is even more ambitious and even more valuable that Steve alluded to in his opening presentation. If I am representing a district in the middle of Nebraska, I may be intellectually interested in what the American people as a whole think, but I'm vitally interested in what the people in my district think. And so when this project is translated into a citizen cabinet in 435 congressional districts or 50 states, at that point, it seems to me that the project will have a serious lever with people who are responding to electoral as well as policy imperatives, because I can imagine someone from Marin County or the middle of Nebraska looking at these results and saying, this may be true for the American people as a whole, but I can tell you in the district I represent, the balance of opinion is quite different.
My question flows directly out of that. What, if you were to tick off right now, Alice, the top 3 or 4 major economic pressures on an American president, on an American politician, where does Social Security fit in?
It's not a major economic pressure of the moment. And that's one reason I think that it's not being addressed, because although it would be a very good thing to fix it now, and it's easier to fix it now than to wait. And that's been true for 25 years.
But you can always put it off.
But you can always put it off one more year. And that is a problem. So I think it's not mysterious that they haven't brought it to the top. And one thing that was true in 1983 that is actually not true now is that they were up against the fund running out of money.
That's absolutely right.
And
that is not the case now.
that is not the case now, except for the Disability Trust Fund, which is another issue, but it is about to run out of money, and they ought to address that. But they could address that by kicking it down the road, by transferring some funds from the retirement fund to the disability fund. So they may not. But let me just pile on what Bill said. I am enormously enthusiastic about the prospect of taking this national. I've worked, as Bill has and others of you have, in trying to find out what the American public really thinks. And it is true, and we've known this for a long time, that if you bring people together and give them a briefing, that they are much better at solving problems than the politicians are. This is a new technique for doing this. We used to have to get people in a room, and there have been very successful efforts to do that, and they do ratify the notion that the American public are better problem solvers than politicians. But now if you can do it online and get a lot of people involved, it opens up the prospect of having a really large group of people, you've talked about 100,000, that could be distributed around in everybody's congressional district. So they would probably find, actually, that the solutions in Nebraska were a little different from the solutions in Philadelphia, but not that much.
Well, we'll find out, won't we?
Yeah.
Well, something we have done is we've compared the responses of people in red districts to people in blue districts, and they're not very different.
Yeah.
The similarities just overwhelm the the differences, and we found that even among Republicans and Democrats, there was in the end not all that much difference, even though there was some difference in the way they responded to different arguments. But I just wanted to get back to something that Bill was saying too about, well, the policymakers face all these organized interests, and that's very powerful, and it affects their campaign contributions and all these kinds of things. Well, yes, absolutely. And that is also the thing that really bothers Americans, the thing that really frustrates them, and why confidence in government has gone down, and their perception is that organized interests are really running everything and not the will of the people, and not the sense of the people, as the founder said. And this is very contrary to the vision of how American democracy is supposed to operate that was presented by the founders. And so there is this real sense that there's been some kind of violation of some fundamental contract between the American people and their government that has really, undermined trust in government. And so this process of giving people a voice, and for people to see policymakers listening to people and so on, is a really, I think, a central part of the process of restoring trust in government.
But how far away, picking up Alice's point, if this idea, the way that you've lined it up, has so much wonderful potential, in your judgment, as you have laid out this program, how far away are we from where we are now to a time when we might be able to implement a program like this?
Yeah, well, I would just echo what Bill said. These kind of national data elicit some interest, but there tends to be an assumption that, well, my district is different, or it doesn't tell me what's going on. So it is critical that we start getting that, and we are going to start building them out in some districts in the very near future and in some states. So, and that means we will be communicating directly to the offices of the legislator about what is going on, and to the local media and so on. So yeah, I do believe that when people do get information at a local level about specific constituencies, then you will probably see a bigger impact on policymakers.
What parts of the country and what districts would you say require that kind of emphasis now? What are the priorities?
All of them.
That's not good enough. Which ones are up front in need of work right now?
Well, I think there's tremendous amount of evidence that members of Congress have a poor understanding of what's going on in their district. I can't say which ones have it more than others, because we don't have rich enough, almost all the studies that have been done are with national samples, 1,000 or so.
Let me try an answer to that. I think it's the safe districts, the ones where there is a huge preponderance of Republicans or a huge preponderance of Democrats, because it's so easy for them just to do the party line. And for the Democrats to say no cuts in benefits ever, and for the Republicans to say no increases in taxes ever, and that gets to be the end of the conversation, and why should you go further? And it's those districts that if you had to choose, I would concentrate on. Can I say one more thing, though, about the timing? I think this is a wonderful moment, if you could do it, to tackle Social Security, because we're not going to have budget action for the next year or two. And one of the cogent arguments that the advocates for the elderly made was, we do need to solve the Social Security problem, but not in the budget context. Don't balance the budget on the backs of the elderly, and do it as something separate. Well, now we get a chance to do something separate.
Bill.
Well, let me add to that. One of the hats that I wear is as a co-founder of an organization, actually a tripartisan organization of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, called No Labels, which has a national membership of more than 500,000, and also now has a problem solvers group in Congress that as of yesterday had 92 members, evenly balanced between Democrats and Republicans. And we did a survey a couple of months ago to try to assess the relative importance that the American people give to certain goals that their elected representatives might pursue. And 4 rose to the top, clearly, and one of them was stabilizing Social Security and, by the way, Medicare for the long term. So if somebody were willing to step forward on the national stage and say, I'm running as a problem solver, not a point scorer, and let me tell you the 4 top problems that my campaign will address and my administration, if you invest me with your confidence, will address. If one of them were stabilizing Social Security for the long term in a fair and balanced manner, I think said candidate would get a very favorable reception from the American people. And in that sense, I see Steve's results as very consistent with the survey research that I've been involved in.
That's fascinating. We've got about 15 minutes or so for questions, and those of you who have a question, please raise your hand right there, please.
Hi, Mary Beth Franklin with Investment News. I'm just curious, this is a powerful tool. How do you plan to get this in the hands of the people who may in turn influence their representatives?
Steve?
College
Yeah,
levels,
sure.
civic levels, how do you do it?
Well, we have developed this organization, Voice of the People, that is an advocacy organization. It's separate from the Program for Public Consultation. And it has a membership and a website, VOP.org, that people can go and sign the petition and become, kind of sense, part of that community. We will be developing citizen cabinets in a number of districts and states around the country, and we're going to be particularly focusing on on building up that membership in those states and districts for people to keep track of it, to be aware of it, to encourage their member to pay attention to it, to encourage local media to pay attention to it. So this is our basic plan for I don't know if Rich, our executive director, wants to add anything to that.
Well, we also want to encourage everyone to go on the website, VOP.org, and try the simulation to get that knowledge level up in the general citizenry. Everyone starting today can go on VOP.org and actually go through the Social Security simulation that we just released.
One of the ideas in this, it isn't just getting the representative samples, to get as many people as possible to do it, to get educated, for people to use these simulations in schools and civic groups and so on, for people in interest groups to participate in them and really think it through as an individual, not just in terms of an interest-based organization. So to raise the level of discourse so that the quality of the input that people are giving is more meaningful and more closely targeted at the decisions that Congress is truly dealing with.
Wonderful. In the back there, please. Yep.
This is kind of a technical question for Steve. Looking at your briefing, I noticed you turned a distribution into a binary, and that is the impact of no action taken. You took the expectation value of $970. There's a large literature now on how people deal with uncertainty, and usually the expectation value is not the critical number. Would the survey have differed if you, in fact, presented a wider range of scenarios as to what benefits would look like in 2030, depending on the various parameters that are involved?
I doubt it, but they're all kind of incremental. Basically, our idea is to put people in a frame where that's relevant to the way they experience values right now, or experience dollars right now, so I think that's the best way to present it to them. But I'm interested if you think that there would be another way that would be more accurate.
Sort of stuff where people have expectations and how that conditions how they look at odds, for example. The possibility of a small decrease versus the possibility of large decreases quite often are weighed by people differently than the expectation value.
Yeah, I think those kinds of things should enter into the analysis, and then you could do experiments to see if those vary. And there are some people who are doing some experiments along those lines. I don't think that there are any kind of modest adjustments that would have had a major impact on how people ultimately what kind of policies they ultimately proposed. You want to add anything to that, Clay? Clay is our research director who played a central role
In terms of
organizing all
deciding
this.
what kinds of information we offer, we look very closely at what is made available by, in this case, sources like the SSA's Office of the Actuary, or possibly CBO, or possibly the Congressional Research Service, so that if in a context where sometimes CBO presents more than one hypothetical outcome, and in a context like that, we would be very interested in working with something like that. But the overall ground is to show public respondents and people who want to take the exercise, how is the problem painted by the people who are responsible for painting it, for showing the elected members of Congress how the problem looks.
It goes back to trying to simulate the experience that members of Congress have, so we try to give them the stimuli that members of Congress get. So we focus particularly on congressional agencies and the way they present the
Do the
issue.
members of Congress actually get that kind of what seems to me sophisticated briefing? I'm not so sure.
I have to say that more than once in the course of doing this, one of the staffers we were talking to said, you know, it'd really be good if members of Congress would go through this process too. A lot of your people are going to be better informed than a lot of members of Congress. And I suppose these are probably the people who know.
Alice?
Well, but yes, I think I've had some experience with prior efforts. America Speaks did some of these. They were different. They weren't online. They were people in the room. Actually, if you do that kind of thing in a member's district, they love it, and then they get the briefing. You can also do it for members of Congress, and we have quite a number of times done budget exercises for members of Congress. They learn a lot. They're more sophisticated now, but if there was a time when members of Congress who weren't on the budget committees didn't really have to know much about the budget. And that's probably true of what members who are not on Ways and Means and Finance. They don't know an awful lot about Social Security. If you can get them to do the exercise or to participate with their constituents, it's a learning experience.
Fantastic.
It's really remarkable how when we got people from both sides of the aisle together around the table, they were able to come to agreement about what the basic facts were and what the basic arguments were, and that they were fairly presented. And so that we can create a structure where people all have a shared set of facts, right? Yeah. And a shared set of value concerns too, so that then we're really talking about the real issue rather than it simply being a power struggle and throwing the one-liners at each other.
It's even true of politicians if they're in the mode of solving the problem.
Yes, please, right here in the front.
It says in here
Could
that,
you identify yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm June Taylor and I'm with Get America Working. You said it's noteworthy that people prefer options that would increase the progressive structure. And did you look at means testing? I mean, I don't understand why you would give everybody 85 or older a bonus if they don't need it. Or is it too difficult, or there just aren't that many Warren Buffetts, and so means testing?
Again, these were options that are in play, that are in bills, and that have been scored by the Social Security actuary, and that's how it was structured, and that's how it was scored. We did the model we had that we did present of reducing benefits for the top 25, 40, or 50% of earners is arguably sometimes described as a means testing approach.
Let me just,
No.
let me just, add to that a couple of points. First of all, I think something that jumps out of this survey is that people are favorably inclined towards a dedicated revenue stream if they're favorably inclined towards the purpose that the stream is going to. And so, if you had presented the option of going to general revenues or something, I think that the results would have been quite different, and I think many politicians are aware of that, and they all should be. But here's the broader point. The woman who just asked the question is from an organization called Get America Working. I know something about that organization, and as I recall, one of your, I think your central proposal is to swap a substantial portion of the payroll tax out in return for a carbon tax. The argument being that you'll get more work and less, and less climate change, and those are both good things. And I wonder what the results would have looked like if there had been a more adventurous selection of options here. Because I have to say, I have personally written in favor of that bold approach, and I think it has some real merit, and its consequences might be even better than increasing the cap or increasing the payroll tax, certainly on the economic front, and but it's not really on the public radar right now.
Alice?
Yes, I was struck by the fact, and I actually like this, that this study assumes that we all like Social Security pretty much as it is, as a social insurance program, and we're not considering dramatic changes to it. Structural changes. And if you start doing structural changes, then there are an awful lot.
In the back there, yes, please.
Hi, my name is Ben Vecti. I'm from Social Security Works, Research Director at Social Security Works. Thank you for doing this study. It's very useful and helpful, and I think it'll provide a good basis for discussion. I had one question. One thing that always strikes me about social insurance debates, or about Social Security debates, is that often it's discussed solely in budget terms, as if the problem here were the shortfall, and that's the extent of the problem. Obviously, the shortfall is a problem, but did you talk at all? I noticed in the briefing I didn't see anything about talking to people about retirement income security and what people have saved, the kind of pensions, the fact that 401ks are serving a certain segment of the population, but not everyone, how much they've saved for retirement, things like that. In other policy areas like defense policy, for example, if you gave people a list of weapon systems and said, which ones do you want to keep, which ones do you want other ones, how much would you be willing to pay for that in additional taxes? If you didn't tell people about the threats facing the country in terms of terrorism or maybe threats from Iran's nuclear program, et cetera, those weapon systems wouldn't be put in any kind of policy context. So I'm curious, if you talk to people about the purpose of Social Security, which is to achieve retirement security, if they might have given different responses, or if you would consider adding that kind of information to your briefing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we work out when we talk to the staffers on both sides of the aisle is what should go in the briefing, as in what are essentially neutral facts, and what should go inside the arguments, right? And sometimes it's a question of balancing out what's in the briefing. Well, if you put that in the briefing, you should put this in the briefing too, and there's a kind of a little negotiation, right? So you're pointing at some facts that might or might not could have been in the briefing maybe, but if not, they could go inside an argument. And then we talk to the people who are key proponents or making the arguments, and what do you think are the most important arguments? And there's always more you could do, and there's always more you could cover, but we just try to we talk to the people who are the bigger key players and until everybody's satisfied that these are the most central arguments. As a general principle, if there is some key item of information that would really move the way people think we want to know about it, we're going to do everything we can to find out about it, and we would in some way try to incorporate it in the next time around. That is central to our model. I mean, there are certain key items of information that you eventually sometimes stumble upon where people have a major misperception, and when they get that information, things really shift dramatically. But to some extent, you also, though, have to assume that people are taking some of the things, the kinds of things you're talking about into account.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Alton Fry, I'm with the Council on Foreign Relations, but I asked this question not as a representative, but as a member of AARP. It seems to me that one of the heavier thumbs on this scale is that very large organization. And I wonder if both Steve and Bill might have an opinion about whether it would be worth, even in advance of developing the full Citizens Cabinet approach nationwide, to seek a serious survey among AARP members as a particularly weighty force within this discussion. Bill, I wonder if you think that would be skewing the results in a way that would distort the members of Congress's reaction, or do you think it might be a constructive intermediate step? Because this work I consider immensely constructive and laying the groundwork for something that over time could become a continuing factor on many issues. But in the short term, would it make sense to get a kind of AARP survey along these lines to factor into the congressional deliberations?
Well, I would regard that as a high-risk, high-reward strategy, right? Because if the results were that attitudes of AARP members mirrored the results that Steve has generated for the population as a whole, and the age breakdown that he provided gave some indication that that might be the case, then you could go to politicians and say, look, we took a random sample of AARP members and they support exactly the same thing that the American people as a whole support. If it came out that way, that would be enormously, enormously powerful rhetorically, politically, publicly. It's also the case that I have dealings with senior AARP officials, policy officials all the time, and the view that they are closed to suggestions of this sort, in my experience, is just false. And so my sense is that the leadership would probably welcome, if I may put it this way, a démarche.
I'm all for it. I'm ready to take the risk, whatever. I'll hereby predict that the differences between the AARP membership and others in that age category or the general public is not going to be dramatic. These things have been done, like with NRA members, and NRA members are distinctly different from NRA policy. This is really core to the whole issue we have here, which is that people are different than organized interests. Organized interests do not necessarily represent the people they say they're representing. They have an interest-based goal, while people are always more holistic. And they think about, that they're not just a member of AARP, they're a whole person. And that always comes through when you give them that opportunity. Well, there was I forget, the Club for Growth of some member, some person who runs that organization said, "It's not my job to compromise. I'm against all compromise, and I'm never satisfied. I always want more. That's my job," right? And that's the job of interest. But individuals, even members of organizations, they take the whole into account, and their responses tend to have this whole other quality. So I'm all for it. If you can give me access to those members, I'd do it in a heartbeat. We're already encouraging people to do it.
Yeah, I am too. Let me chime in on this, and I thought of it even before you asked the question. Because at first, it's true that the leadership of AARP has not been as closed-minded as you might think. They have made the point that I made earlier, that Social Security reform should be considered on its merits and not as part of a budget exercise. That's been a consistent theme. But just as an educational tool, if you could get a large number by advertising it in the magazine or whatever, of AARP members to actually work through the exercise, you would have accomplished quite a lot.
We have run out of time. I'm sorry ask your question. Go ahead.
Just a question on the behavioral impact of this. People are now being encouraged to wait to collect Social Security until it's worth more later, given the longevity, if they can afford it. But a lot of them rush to get it at 62 because they're afraid it won't be there. What do you think the impact of getting this educational information into the hands of the American people might do to the timing of that claiming of benefits?
Yeah, there's a fair amount of polling showing a tremendous amount of pessimism on the part of the public. And they hear about Social Security going bankrupt, and they think that means that, 20 years from now, it'll just fall down, evaporate, it's all over, there's no more Social Security. So there's been a lot of misreporting that is evidenced in polls. And so it may well be that if people had a better understanding of what we're talking about, the terrible thing we're talking about is a 23% cut in benefits, not the whole thing, not zero, or a 100% cut rather. And if people understood that better, and again, this kind of process is something that's supposed to feed a more reasoned and informed discussion. It could have an impact on people making those decisions.
Let me ask the three of you, starting with Bill, because we have run out of time.
Yeah.
What concluding bit of wisdom would you like to leave us with in 30 seconds?
Well, very, very briefly, and I'm just now building on something that Steve said much earlier, I think that there are all sorts of reasons to get this issue on the table as quickly as possible. First of all, stabilizing a vital social insurance program for the long term is objectively very important. Second, given the public's loss not only of trust in the motives of government, but also confidence that government can do anything important, actually achieving this would be a very important, I think, inflection point in public attitudes. And third, it would clarify the real nature of our long-term fiscal problem, which is not principally a Social Security problem. It is principally a healthcare problem.
Alice?
I agree with all of that and don't think I could say it better.
Okay, Steve?
I would just reiterate that there's a growing body of evidence, and this study is one more, that an informed public can create a very valuable contribution to difficult policy issues.
And we say good luck, and thank you all very much for coming.